There are certain conversations that begin long before anyone speaks. They begin in anticipation, in rehearsed sentences, in rising anxiety, in the weight we feel in the body when we know something important has to be said and we are not sure how it will be received. A conversation with a partner about disappointment. A conversation with a colleague about resentment or missed expectations. A conversation with a parent, a friend, a manager, or a child that has been postponed because the stakes feel too high. Difficult Conversations is a book about those moments. It is about why they feel so complicated, why even intelligent and well-meaning people often mishandle them, and how we might learn to navigate them with more clarity and less damage. The authors do not treat difficult conversations as rare exceptions in life. They treat them as central to life itself. Relationships are shaped by them. Trust is shaped by them. Leadership is shaped by them. Self-respect is shaped by them. And the quality of our days is often shaped by whether we avoid these conversations, mishandle them, or learn to engage them more skillfully. What makes the book especially valuable is that it does not reduce difficult conversations to a few simple tips. It does not pretend that all conflict is solved by being calm or by using softer words. Instead, it shows that difficult conversations are difficult because several things are happening at once. We think we are arguing about facts, but we are also dealing with feelings, assumptions, identity, and the fear of what the conversation might mean about who we are. Once this becomes visible, hard conversations stop seeming random. They reveal a structure. And once you can see the structure, you can begin to respond with more intention and less confusion. The single most important idea in the book is that every difficult conversation contains 3 conversations happening at the same time. There is the what happened conversation, the feelings conversation, and the identity conversation. This framework explains why difficult exchanges often feel tangled. People think they are discussing one issue, but they're actually moving through several layers at once. In the what happened conversation, people disagree about facts, intentions, causes, and blame. In the feelings conversation, emotions such as anger, hurt, fear, embarrassment, and disappointment shape the interaction, whether they are expressed or hidden. In the identity conversation, deeper questions arise about competence, goodness, worth, fairness, and self-image. The beauty of this framework is that it gives shape to confusion. It shows why difficult conversations cannot be handled well by dealing only with surface content. If you talk only about facts and ignore feelings, the conversation remains emotionally unfinished. If you focus only on feelings without addressing differing interpretations, the practical issue may remain unresolved. And if you ignore identity, you may not understand why the other person is reacting so strongly, or why you yourself feel so threatened. The authors want us to recognize that difficulty is not just in the topic. It is in the layering. The more we can separate and understand those layers, the more capable we become. This is not a technique for making all conversations easy. It is a way of becoming more intelligent about what is actually happening when communication becomes charged. Most difficult conversations begin inside the what happened conversation. This is where people argue about what occurred, who meant what should have happened, who is right, and who caused the problem. The difficulty here is that each person usually enters the conversation convinced that their version is the accurate one. They believe they see the situation clearly, while the other person is confused, unreasonable, defensive, or dishonest. The authors argue that this certainty is one of the first and biggest obstacles to productive dialogue. Human beings experience their own interpretation as reality. We notice some facts, overlook others, and construct a story that feels obvious from where we stand. But in most difficult conversations, the other person has done the same thing. They have their own information, their own assumptions, and their own interpretation, which feels just as obvious to them. The problem is not simply that one person is lying or one person is incapable of reason. The problem is that perspectives are partial. Each person is looking through a different window. The book invites us to shift from certainty to curiosity. Instead of asking, "How do I prove I'm right?" we are asked to consider, "How do I understand why each of us sees this situation the way we do?" That is a profound shift. It does not require surrendering judgment. It requires abandoning the fantasy that the conversation will go well if only we explain our version forcefully enough. Most people do not change through pressure. They change through understanding. And often the first understanding needed is not agreement, but recognition that two sincere people can inhabit very different interpretations of the same event. Once this becomes visible, the conversation becomes less of a trial and more of an inquiry. One of the book's most useful and mature ideas is the move from blame to contribution. In conflict, people are often desperate to determine fault. Who created this problem? Who failed? Who should be held responsible? Blame is emotionally tempting because it promises clarity and moral certainty. If the problem belongs to the other person, then I am safe, innocent, and justified. But blame often makes conversations much worse. It narrows attention, increases defensiveness, and blocks the kind of learning that could actually improve the situation. The authors suggest that contribution is a better frame. Contribution asks how each person, or each set of circumstances, helped create the current outcome. It is not about splitting responsibility evenly. Some people may have contributed more than others. Some situations involve clear wrongdoing. But even then, contribution is often the more useful question if the goal is understanding and change. How did this pattern develop? What choices, assumptions, habits, or silences helped create the problem? What did each of us do that made this harder? The contribution frame is powerful because it opens the future. Blame often traps us in moral accusation. Contribution creates room for action. If I can see how I contributed, even in part, then I have leverage. I am no longer waiting only for the other person to change. This does not mean accepting unfair responsibility. It means becoming interested in the system of interaction rather than only in fault. Many recurring problems in work and relationships persist because both people are too focused on blame to examine the pattern they are co-creating. The book helps us step out of that trap. Few patterns create more friction in difficult conversations than the clash between intention and impact. One person says, "What you did hurt me, embarrassed me, excluded me, or undermined me." The other replies, "That was not my intention." In many conflicts, both people are telling the truth from their own perspective. The hurt is real, and the intention may not have been malicious. But people often use intention and impact as if one must cancel the other. If I did not mean it, then you should not be upset. If I was hurt, then you must have meant harm. The book shows why this binary is so unhelpful. We are often poor judges of other people's intentions, especially when we feel wounded or angry. We fill in the unknown with stories, often negative ones. At the same time, our own intentions do not fully determine the meaning of our actions. We may mean to be efficient and come across as cold. We may mean to be funny and come across as cruel. We may mean to help and come across as controlling. Mature communication requires making space for both truths. I may not have intended the harm, and the harm may still have occurred. This principle is immensely important because so many conversations get stuck here. The speaker wants their intentions understood. The receiver wants their experience recognized. The book suggests that both are valid aims, but that impact usually needs acknowledgement before intention can be explored productively. Otherwise, intention becomes a defense, and the injured person feels even less seen. This is one of the book's most humane lessons. Good intentions matter, but they do not erase the importance of impact. Many people try to handle difficult conversations by staying factual, as though emotion is something unprofessional or unhelpful that should be kept outside the room. But the authors argue that feelings are not separate from difficult conversations. They are woven through them. Anger, fear, shame, disappointment, anxiety, frustration, confusion, sadness, resentment, and hope are all present, whether named or not. If they are ignored, they do not disappear. They leak. They shape tone, timing, interpretation, and memory. They show up as sarcasm, distance, stiffness, aggression, silence, or overreaction. One of the book's gifts is that it legitimizes feelings without surrendering to them. It does not encourage emotional dumping. It encourages emotional honesty. Feelings matter because they reveal what the situation means to us. They point toward values, losses, threats, needs, and expectations. If I feel angry, perhaps I feel violated or dismissed. If I feel deeply anxious, perhaps something important to my security or identity is at stake. If I feel hurt, perhaps I expected care and experienced neglect. By reflecting on emotion rather than merely acting from it, we become more articulate and less explosive. The book also challenges the common habit of disguising feelings as judgments. Instead of saying, "I felt rejected," we say, "You abandoned me." Instead of saying, "I felt ignored," we say, "You do not care." These judgments intensify defensiveness because they present emotion as accusation. The authors invite us to reclaim the underlying feeling and express it more directly. This makes conversations more vulnerable but often much more real. Difficult conversations become more productive when feelings are included thoughtfully, because without them the conversation stays technically structured but emotionally false. The book does not stop at saying feelings matter. It asks where they come from. This is an important distinction because emotions often feel immediate and self-explanatory, yet they are usually shaped by the story we are telling about what happened. If someone interrupts me, I may feel insulted because I tell myself the story that they do not respect me. If someone forgets a commitment, I may feel hurt because I tell myself the story that I do not matter to them. If someone gives me criticism, I may feel shame because I tell myself the story that I am failing or inadequate. The event matters, but the story also matters. This does not mean the feeling is fake. It means emotions are linked to meaning. Understanding that link gives us more clarity and more freedom. We can ask, what am I interpreting this situation to mean? What assumption am I making? Is there another possible reading? The authors want us to become more reflective in this way, not less emotional. Because when we understand the story beneath our emotion, we can express ourselves more honestly and with less confusion. We can say, "When that happened, I told myself I was being dismissed, and I felt angry and small." That is very different from saying, "You always disrespect me." The first opens conversation. The second often shuts it down. This is one of the book's subtle but profound lessons. Emotional intelligence is not the absence of strong feeling. It is the ability to understand and communicate feeling in a way that invites dialogue rather than escalation. Beneath facts and feelings lies another layer, the identity conversation. This is the internal dialogue we have about what the difficult conversation seems to say about who we are. Am I competent? Am I a good person? Am I lovable? Am I strong? Am I being exposed as inadequate? Am I powerless? These identity questions are often why a conversation feels much heavier than the topic alone would suggest. A piece of workplace feedback may feel crushing because it collides with a self-image of competence. A disagreement in marriage may feel overwhelming because it raises the fear of being fundamentally unworthy or impossible to live with. A conflict with a friend may feel destabilizing because it seems to say I am disloyal or selfish. The authors argue that identity becomes especially fragile when we hold simplistic self-images. If I must always be good, always be right, always be fair, always be strong, then any challenge feels catastrophic. The book encourages a more complex and resilient sense of self. You can be a good person who still makes mistakes. You can be competent and still need growth. You can have good intentions and still cause harm. You can be strong and still feel hurt. This kind of complexity is stabilizing because it allows feedback and conflict to exist without total collapse. You do not need to defend yourself with such desperation if your sense of self can survive imperfection. The identity conversation matters greatly because people often react to the threat beneath the surface rather than to the issue at hand. If that threat remains invisible, the conversation can feel disproportionate and mysterious. Once named, it becomes easier to understand why a seemingly modest issue has such emotional force. The book helps explain a common experience. Sometimes we leave a conversation and think, why did I react so strongly? Why did that comment stay with me all day? Why did I become so defensive so quickly? Often the answer lies in the identity layer. We are reacting not only to what was said, but to what we think it means about us. A correction from a boss may awaken a fear of inadequacy. A complaint from a partner may trigger a fear of being unloving. A boundary set by a friend may stir a fear of rejection or failure. When this happens, the conversation stops being a limited exchange about one issue and starts feeling like a referendum on the self. The authors do not say we should eliminate this entirely. Identity matters. But they do encourage us to understand our identity vulnerabilities so they do not unconsciously control the conversation. If I know that criticism quickly makes me feel like a failure, I can prepare for that. I can remind myself that one conversation is not the whole truth about who I am. That reminder can be enough to keep me from reacting in ways that make everything worse. Self-awareness, in this sense, is not self-protection from all pain. It is the ability to stay grounded enough to remain in dialogue. How we begin a difficult conversation often determines whether the other person leans in or braces for attack. Many people begin with their own story told as the truth. You were unfair. You never listen. You embarrassed me. You failed me. These openings may express real pain or conviction, but they usually provoke defensiveness because they arrive as accusation. The authors offer an alternative called starting from the third story. The third story is the version of events that a neutral observer might describe, a story that acknowledges the difference between your experience and the other person's without beginning from blame. For example, instead of saying, "You ignored my concerns," the third story might be, "We seem to have very different views about what happened in that meeting, and I think it would help to talk through it." Or instead of saying, "You let me down again," it might begin, "I have been feeling frustrated about how our plans have been unfolding, and I think we may be seeing the situation differently." The power of the third story is that it lowers defensiveness while preserving seriousness. It frames the conversation as a shared problem of understanding rather than a one-sided prosecution. This does not mean becoming vague or evasive. It means beginning in a way that invites curiosity rather than immediate self-protection. The book treats this as one of the most practical moves we can make, because a good beginning creates the possibility of a different middle and end. Listening is one of the most praised communication skills, but in difficult conversations it becomes something more demanding. Here, listening is not passive politeness. It is a disciplined effort to understand how the other person came to see the situation as they do. What information are they using? What assumptions are they making? What feelings are shaping their reaction? What values are at stake for them? What fear or hope lies underneath their position? Most people do not listen this way when they feel threatened. They listen selectively, mainly for errors to correct or openings to defend themselves. The result is a conversation in which both people speak but neither feels heard. The authors argue that true listening is transformative because it changes the emotional atmosphere. When people feel understood, they often become less rigid. They clarify. They reveal more. They become more able to hear in return. Understanding, then, is not the same as agreement, but it is often the doorway to more productive disagreement. Listening in this book is tied to curiosity. If I am genuinely curious about your experience, I ask different questions. I stay with your answer longer. I resist the urge to reduce your perspective to a flaw. This is not easy, especially when the other person's story includes painful things about me. But it is one of the book's clearest invitations. If you want the conversation to become more than an exchange of positions, you must be willing to understand the other person's world from the inside, at least for a while. The book also reminds us that difficult conversations require clarity about our own experience. Curiosity about the other person does not mean abandoning ourselves. In fact, productive dialogue depends on both sides contributing honestly. The challenge is to speak for yourself without turning your experience into the only valid account of reality. This means describing your perspective, your feelings, your interpretation, and what matters to you in a way that is direct but not absolute. Instead of saying, "You were trying to humiliate me," you might say, "When that happened, I felt embarrassed and I interpreted it as dismissive." Instead of saying, "You never care," you might say, "I have been feeling unimportant in this pattern, and I want to understand whether you see it differently." This kind of language is powerful because it combines honesty with ownership. You are not pretending to be neutral, but you are also not disguising your experience as unquestionable fact. The authors want us to communicate from a place that is both grounded and open. That combination is difficult because strong emotion often tempts us into either attack or retreat. But speaking for yourself with care creates the possibility that the other person can hear you without immediately needing to defend against your certainty. It makes room for response rather than only resistance. A major practical lesson in the book is that difficult conversations rarely go well when entered impulsively. Preparation matters. Before speaking, the authors encourage reflection. What is the issue as I see it? What assumptions am I making? What information might I be missing? What emotions are present in me? What identity concerns are making this feel so charged? What do I hope will come from the conversation? What am I worried might happen? This kind of preparation serves several purposes. It slows reactivity. It makes hidden stories more visible. It clarifies purpose. It helps distinguish what is essential from what is merely emotionally loud. Most people prepare for difficult conversations by rehearsing their case. The book encourages a different kind of preparation, one that includes understanding your own internal complexity. That change matters. If I know the conversation is touching an old fear in me, I can enter with more steadiness. If I know I am assuming intention without evidence, I can soften my certainty. Preparation is not about controlling the conversation perfectly. It is about showing up with enough self-awareness that you are not driven entirely by instinct. The brilliance of difficult conversations is that its framework applies across almost every domain of life. In work settings, it helps with feedback, misalignment, broken expectations, leadership tension, and conflict between colleagues. When a manager sees a performance problem, the challenge is rarely just to deliver a message. The challenge is to understand the employee's perspective, address feelings, and avoid triggering identity collapse or defensive blame. Likewise, when peers are in conflict, the conversation improves when each side moves from proving fault to understanding contribution. In relationships, the framework can be even more powerful because feelings and identity stakes are often higher. A disagreement about chores may really be about respect, appreciation, and old stories of being taken for granted. A recurring conflict about time, money, or attention may actually involve deep fears about love, worth, and reliability. The book helps people see that these layers are not signs that the relationship is doomed. They're signs that the conversation is complex. In families, where history is long and identity is often tender, the framework offers language for understanding why small moments sometimes trigger enormous reactions. Across all these settings, the same principles return. Curiosity over certainty. Contribution over blame. Impact alongside intention. Feelings acknowledged, not denied. Identity stabilized, not shattered. These are not narrow techniques. They are habits of mind that improve almost any hard conversation. At a deeper level, the book is about courage. Not the loud courage of confrontation alone, but the quieter courage of staying present when a conversation becomes uncomfortable. It takes courage to hear something about yourself you do not want to hear. It takes courage to name a feeling without turning it into accusation. It takes courage to admit you may not fully understand what happened. It takes courage to remain curious when your instinct is to defend. Many people think of difficult conversations mainly as a challenge of strategy. The book shows that they are also a challenge of character. Can you remain human under pressure? Can you resist the urge to simplify the other person into the villain and yourself into the innocent one? Can you tolerate ambiguity long enough for understanding to grow? This kind of courage is not dramatic, but it is rare and deeply valuable. It changes the moral quality of a conversation. It creates the possibility that conflict can become clarifying rather than merely destructive. In the end, difficult conversations offers more than communication advice. It offers a way of understanding human conflict itself. It teaches that when communication becomes hard, what we need is not more force, more certainty, or more polished rhetoric alone. What we need is a deeper grasp of what is happening beneath the surface. We need to see that facts are filtered through perspective. That blame usually blocks learning. That intentions do not erase impact. That feelings shape everything whether or not we acknowledge them. That identity can make small moments feel enormous. And that real dialogue begins when we stop trying only to win and start trying to understand. This does not mean all difficult conversations will end in agreement. Some will remain painful. Some will reveal genuine incompatibilities, enduring differences, or limits in the relationship. But even then, the way we enter and conduct those conversations matters. It affects whether people feel degraded or respected, whether clarity grows or confusion deepens, whether the relationship becomes more brittle or more honest. The book's lasting message is that difficult conversations are not a separate category of life. They are part of how life unfolds. We cannot avoid them without shrinking our honesty and weakening our relationships. But we can learn to meet them differently, with more curiosity, with more steadiness, with greater awareness of our own stories, feelings, and fears. And when we do that, difficult conversations stop being only moments of threat. They become moments of revelation about others, about ourselves, and about what it takes to remain truthful and connected at the same time.